Hello, third graders. I'm here with Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Chapter 3, The Lone Islands. Land in sight, shouted a man from the bows. Lucy, who had been talking to Rince on the poop deck, came pattering down the ladder and raced forward. As she went, she was joined by Edmund, and they found Caspian, Drinian, and Reepicheep already in the forecastle. It was a coldish morning, the sky very pale, and the sea very dark blue, with little white caps of foam. And there, a little way off on the starboard bow, was the nearest of the lone islands, Felamath, with low green hills on the top of the sea, and behind it, further off, the gray slopes of its sister, Dorn. Same old Felamath, same old Dorn, said Lucy, clasping her hands. Oh, Edmund, how long is it since you and I saw them last? I never understood why they belonged to Narnia, said Caspian. Did Peter the High King conquer them? Oh no, said Edmund. They were Narnian before our time, in the days of the White Witch. By the way, I have never yet heard how these remote islands became attached to the crown of Narnia. If I ever do, and if the story is at all interesting, I'll put it in some other book. I love it when authors do that. Are we to put in here, sire? Asked Drinian. I shouldn't think it would be much good landing on Felamath, said Edmund. It was almost uninhabited in our day, and it looks as if it's the same still. The people lived mostly on Dorn, and a little on Avra. That's the third one, you can't see it. They only kept sheep on Felamath. Well, then we'll have to double the cape, I suppose, said Drinian, and land on Dorn. That'll mean rowing. I'm sorry, we're not landing on Felamath, said Lucy. I'd like to walk there again. It's so lonely, a nice kind of loneliness. All grass and clover and soft sea air. I'd love to stretch my legs too, said Caspian. I tell you what, why shouldn't we go ashore in the boat and send it back, and then we could walk across Felamath, let the Dawn Treader pick us up on the other side. If Caspian had been as experienced then as he became later on in the voyage, he would not have made this suggestion. But at the moment, it seemed like an excellent one. Oh, do, let's, said Lucy. You'll come, will you? Said Caspian to Eustace, who had come on deck with his hand bandaged. Remember, Reepicheep had gone after him because he had swung him around by the tail. Wasn't a smart thing to do, Eustace. Anything to get off this blasted boat, said Eustace. Blasted, said Drinian. How do you mean? In a civilized country like where I'm from, said Eustace, the ships are so big that when you're inside, you wouldn't even know you're at sea at all. Well, in that case, you might as well just stay ashore, said Caspian. Will you tell them to lower the boat, Drinian? The king, the mouse, and the two Pevensies, that's Edmund and Lucy, and Eustace all got into the boat and were put to the beach in Felamath. When the boat had left them and was being rowed back, they all turned and looked around. They were surprised at how small the Dawn Treader looked. Lucy was, of course, barefoot, having kicked off her shoes while swimming, but that's no hardship if one is going to walk on downy turf. It was delightful to be ashore again and to smell the earth and the grass, even if at first the ground seemed to be pitching up and down like a ship, as it usually does for a while when one has been at sea. It was much warmer here than it had been on board, and Lucy found that the sand was pleasant to her feet as they crossed it. There was a lark singing. They struck inland up a fairly steep though low hill. At the top, of course, they looked back, and there was the Dawn Treader shining like a great bright insect, crawling slowly northwest with her oars. Then they went over to the ridge, and they could see it no longer. Dorn now lay before them, divided from Felamath by a channel about a mile wide. Behind it and to the left lay Avra. The little white town of Narrowhaven on Dorn could easily be seen. Hello, what's this? Edmund said suddenly. In the green valley to which they were descending, 6 or 7 rough-looking men, all armed, were sitting by a tree. Don't tell them who we are, said Caspian. And pray your majesties, why not? Said Reepicheep, who had consented to ride on Lucy's shoulders. It just occurred to me, replied Caspian, that no one here has heard from Narnia for a long time. It's just possible they may not still acknowledge our overlordship, in which case it might not be quite safe to be known as the king. We have our swords, sire, said Reepicheep. Yes, Reap, I know we have, said Caspian, but if it's a question of reconquering the 3 islands, I'd prefer to come back with a rather larger army. By this time, they were quite close to the strangers, one of whom, a big black-haired fellow, shouted out, "Good morning to you!" "And a good morning to you," said Caspian. "Is there still a governor of the Lone Islands?" "To be sure there is," said the man. "Governor Gumpus. His sufficiency is at Narrowhaven. But you'll stay and drink with us." Caspian thanked him, though neither he nor the others much liked the look of their new acquaintances, and all of them sat down. But hardly had they raised their cups to their lips when the black-haired man nodded to his companions, and as quick as lightning, all the 5 visitors found themselves wrapped in strong arms. There was a moment's struggle, but all the advantages were on one side, and soon everyone was disarmed and had their hands tied behind their backs, except Reepicheep, writhing in his captor's grip, biting furiously. "Careful with that beast, Tax," said the leader. "Don't damage him. He'll fetch the best price of the lot, I shouldn't wonder." "Whew," whistled the slave merchant, for that's what he was. "It can talk! Well, I never did. Lord, if I take less than 200 crescents for him." The Calorman crescent, which was the chief coin in those parts, was worth about a third of a pound, and a pound is worth, depending on the market, about $1.50. "So that's what you are," said Caspian, "a kidnapper and a slaver. I hope you're proud of it." Now, said the slaver, "don't start any jaw. The easier you take it, the pleasanter all around. See? I don't do this for fun. I've got to make a living, same as everyone else." "Where will you take us?" asked Lucy, getting the words out with some difficulty. "Over to Narrowhaven," said the slaver, "for market day is tomorrow." "Is there a British consul there?" asked Eustace. "Is there a witch?" said the man. But long before Eustace was tired of trying to explain, the slaver simply said, "I've had enough of this jabber. The mouse is a fair treat, but this one could talk the hind leg off a donkey. Off we go, mates." Then the 4 human prisoners were roped together, not cruelly, but securely, and made to march down to the shore. Reepicheep was carried. He had stopped biting on threat of having his mouth tied up, but he still had a great deal to say, and Lucy really wondered how any man could bear to have the things said to him which were said to the slave dealer by the mouse. But the slave dealer, far from objecting, only said, "Go on," whenever Reepicheep paused for a breath, occasionally adding, "It's as good as a play," or, "Blimey, you can't help almost thinking it knows what it's saying," or, was it one of you that trained it?" Well, this was so infuriating Reepicheep that, let's start that sentence again. That so infuriated Reepicheep that in the end, the number of things he thought of saying it all at once nearly suffocated him, and he became silent. Then they got down to the shore and looked towards Dorne. They found a little village and a longboat on the beach, and lying a little further out, a dirty, bedraggled-looking ship. "Now, youngsters," said the slave dealer, "let's have no fuss, and there's nothing to cry about. All aboard." At that moment, a fine-looking, bearded man came out of one of the houses, an inn, I think, and said, "Well, Pug, more of your usual wares?" The slaver, whose name seemed to be Pug, bowed very low, and in a wheedling kind of voice said, "Yes, please, your lordship." "How much do you want for the boy?" asked the other, pointing at Caspian. "Aha," said Pug, "I knew your lordship would pick the best. No deceiving your lordship with any second rate. That boy, now, I've taken a fancy to him myself, got kind of fond of him, I have. I'm that tender-hearted as ever I ought to have taken up this job. Still, to a customer like your lordship—" "Just tell me the price, Carrion," said the lord sternly. "Do you think I want to listen to your rigmarole about your filthy trade?" 300 crescents, my lord, to your honorable lordship, but to anyone else, I'll give you 150. "Oh, please, please," broke in Lucy, "don't separate us, whatever you do. You don't know—" But then she stopped, for she saw Caspian didn't even now want to be known. 150 then, said the lord. "And for you, little maiden, I'm sorry I cannot buy you all. Unrope my boy, Pug. And look, treat these others well while they're in your hands, or it'll be all the worse for you." "Well," said Pug, Now, who ever heard of a gentleman in my way of business who treated his stock better than I do? Well, why, I treat him like my own children. That's likely enough to be true, said the other grimly. The dreadful moment had now come. Caspian was untied, and his new master said, "This way, lad." And Lucy burst into tears, and Edmund looked very blank, but Caspian looked over his shoulder and said, "Cheer up, I'm sure it'll come out right in the end. So long." "Now, missy," said Pug, "don't you start talking on and spoiling your good looks for the market tomorrow. You be a good girl, and then you won't have nothing to cry about, see?" Then they rowed out to the slave ship and were taken below to a long, rather dark place, none too clean, where they found many other unfortunate prisoners, for Pug was of course a pirate, and he had returned from cruising along the islands and capturing what he could. The children couldn't meet anyone whom they knew. The prisoners were mostly Galmians and Terebinthians, and there they sat in the straw, wondering what was happening to Caspian, and tried to stop Eustace talking, as if anyone except himself was to blame. Meanwhile, Caspian was having a much more interesting time. The man who had bought him led him down a little lane between two of the village houses, and so out onto the open place behind the village. Then he turned and faced him. "You needn't be afraid of me, boy," he said. "I'll treat you well. I bought you for your face. You remind me of someone." "May I ask whom, my lord?" said Caspian. "You remind me of my master, King Caspian of Narnia." Then Caspian decided to risk everything on one stroke. "My lord, I am your master. I am Caspian, King of Narnia." "You make very free," said the other. "How shall I know this is true?" "Firstly, by my face," said Caspian. "Secondly, because I know within 6 guesses who you are. You are one of the 7 lords of Narnia whom my uncle Miraz sent to see the ones I had come to look for. Argos, Bern, Oxian, Restamar, Mavremorn, or I have forgotten the other. And finally, if your lordship will give me a sword, I will prove on any man's body in clean battle that I am Caspian, the son of Caspian, lawful king of Narnia, lord of Cair Paravel, and emperor of the Lone Islands." "By heaven," exclaimed the man, "it is your father's voice and trick of speech. My liege, your majesty." And there in the field he knelt, and he kissed the king's hand. "The moneys your lordship distributed for our person will be made good from our own treasury," said Caspian. So basically he said, "The money that you paid for me, I'll pay you back. Thanks for setting me loose." "But they're not in Pug's purse yet, sire," said Lord Byrne, for it was he, "and never will be, I trust. I have moved his sufficiency, the governor, 100 times to crush this vile traffic in man's flesh." It's a fancy way of saying slavery. "My Lord Byrne," said Caspian, "we must talk of the state of these islands. But first, what is your lordship's own story?" "Short enough, sire," said Byrne. "I came thus far with my 6 fellows, loved to grow on the islands, and felt that I'd have enough of the sea. There was no purpose in returning to Narnia while your majesty's uncle held the reins. So I married and have lived here ever since." "And what is this governor, this Gumpus, like? Does he still acknowledge the king of Narnia for his lord?" "In words, yes. All is done in the king's name. But he would not be pleased to find a real live king of Narnia coming in upon him. And if your majesty came before him alone and unarmed, well, he would not deny his allegiance, but he would pretend to disbelieve you. Your grace's life would be in danger. What following has your majesty in these waters?" "There's my ship just rounding the point," said Caspian. "We're about 30 swords if it came to fighting. Shall we not have my ship in and fall upon Pug and my 3 friends, whom he holds captive?" "Not by my counsel," said Byrne. "As soon as there was a fight, 2 or 3 ships would put out from Narrowhaven to rescue Pug. Your majesty must work by show of more power than you really have, and by terror of the king's name. It must not come to plain battle. Gumpus is a chicken-hearted man, but can be overawed." There was a little more conversation. Caspian and Byrne walked down by the coast a little north of the village, and there Caspian winded his horn. This was not the great magic horn of Narnia, Queen Susan's horn. He had left that at home for the regent Trumpkin to use if any great need fell upon the land in the king's absence. Drinian, who was on the lookout for the signal, recognized the Royal Horn at once, and Dawn Treader began speeding for the shore. Then the boat put off again, and in a few moments Caspian and Lord Byrne were on the deck, explaining the situation to Drinian. He, just like Caspian, wanted to lay the Dawn Treader alongside the slave ship at once and board her, but Byrne made the same objection. "Steer straight down this channel, Captain," said Byrne, "then round to Avra, where my own estates are. But first run up the King's banner, hang out all the shields, and send as many men up to the fighting top as you can. And about 5 bow shots hence, when you get open sea on your port bow, run up a few signals." "Signals? To whom?" said Drinian. "Why, to all the other ships that we haven't got, but which might as well be there that Gumpus thinks that we have." So basically, they're going to pretend like they're talking to people, signaling other ships that aren't really there. "Oh, I see," said Drinian, rubbing his hands. "They'll read our signals. What shall I say? Whole fleet around the south of Avra and assemble at—" "Burnstead," said the Lord Byrne. "That'll do excellently. Their whole journey, if there were any ships, would be out of sight from Narrowhaven." Caspian was sorry for the others languishing in the hold of Pug's slave ship. They would not help finding the rest of the day less enjoyable. Late in the afternoon, for they had all to do by oar, having turned starboard around in the northeastern end of Dorne and poured again around the point of Avra, they entered a good harbor on Avra's southern shore, where Byrne's pleasant lands sloped down to the water's edge. Byrne's people, many of whom they saw working in the fields, were all freemen, and it was a happy and prosperous fief. Here they all went ashore and were royally feasted in a low-pillared house overlooking the bay. Byrne and his gracious wife and merry daughters made good cheer. But after dark, Byrne sent a messenger over by boat to Dorne to order some preparations. He did not say exactly what for the following day. So we're going to leave it here for the weekend with Lucy and Edmund and Eustace at a slave ship, and Caspian planning a trick to try to get back the Lone Islands and reassert his kingship. Hope you have a good weekend. Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Hope you're enjoying it. Love you guys.